The morning air is still, save for the distant chirping of birds and the rhythmic rumble of approaching vehicles on the cobblestone road. It's June 30th, 1934, just before sunrise in Bad Wiessee, a picturesque Bavarian spa town. Inside a quiet lakeside hotel, the Hanselbauer men are sleeping soundly, unaware that their world is about to shatter. Suddenly, doors are kicked in, splintering wood echoing through the tranquil corridors. Shouts of essay and revolt pierce the calm. A figure, disheveled and furious, bursts into Ernst Röhm's room, pistol in hand. It's Adolf Hitler, his face contorted in a rage that chills the very blood. He screams accusations of treason, of betrayal, at the man who has been his loyal, boisterous friend for over a decade. Röhm, caught completely by surprise, barely has time to react before he is dragged from his bed, disoriented and half-dressed. His comrades, roused by the chaos, are likewise seized. One by one, they are forced into waiting cars, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. This isn't an arrest, it's an abduction orchestrated by the very leader they swore allegiance to. The sky above Bad Wiessee begins to lighten, but the light reveals not salvation, but the first chilling strokes of an irreversible descent into darkness. Who would betray their most devoted followers in such a brutal, calculated manner? To understand how we arrived at that horrifying dawn in Bad Wiessee, we must rewind to a time when such a betrayal seemed unimaginable. Imagine Germany in the early 1920s, a nation reeling from the defeat of World War I, suffocated by the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and plagued by hyperinflation and political instability. Amidst this chaos, a new political force was emerging, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP. Their message of national renewal, a strong leader and scapegoating, resonated deeply with a disenfranchised populace. Crucial to their early success was the Sturmabteilung, or SA, the Storm Detachment. These were not just party members, they were the street fighters, the brawlers, the ex-soldiers and Freikorps veterans who brought order, or rather imposed it, on the chaotic streets of Munich and beyond. They wore distinctive brown shirts, marched in disciplined formations, and projected an image of strength and unwavering loyalty. For many young men, joining the SA offered purpose, camaraderie, and a chance to feel powerful in a powerless nation. They saw themselves as the vanguard of a new Germany, the revolutionary army that would sweep away the old order. Led by the charismatic, often brutish, but undeniably popular Ernst Röhm, the SA swelled in numbers, becoming a force to be reckoned with, both feared and admired. Their loyalty to Hitler was, for a long time, absolute, forged in the crucible of street battles and shared ambition. But beneath this veneer of unity, seeds of discord were already being sown, destined to sprout into a deadly harvest. The stage upon which this drama unfolded was the tumultuous Weimar Republic. From its inception in 1919, after the Kaiser's abdication, Germany was a cauldron of political extremism. On the right, groups like the Freikorps, paramilitary units formed from demobilized soldiers, harbored deep resentment against the democratic system and yearned for a return to authoritarian rule. Many of these men, including Ernst Röhm himself, would later form the backbone of the SA. They were accustomed to violence as a political tool. By 1932, the Nazi Party, leveraging this discontent, had become the largest party in the Reichstag, though still unable to form a government alone. Hitler, a masterful orator, skillfully navigated the complex political landscape, promising stability to industrialists and a second revolution to his more radical SA stormtroopers. On January 30, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg, under immense pressure, appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor. This moment, seen by many as a legitimate political maneuver, marked a terrifying turning point. The SA, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands, believed their time had truly come. They were the party's muscle, its enforcers, and they fully expected to be rewarded for their years of loyalty in street battles. Their numbers dwarfed the official German army, the Reichswehr, which by treaty limitations was capped at 100,000 men. This imbalance in power, coupled with the SA's revolutionary fervor, set the stage for an inevitable collision. a struggle for the very soul and future direction of the nascent Third Reich. The old order was dying, but the new one was still violently finding its shape. The initial cracks in the facade of unity began to show almost immediately after Hitler's ascension to the chancellorship. While Hitler quickly moved to dismantle democratic institutions, consolidating power through decree, Ernst Röhm and his SA had a different vision. They hadn't fought for a bourgeois revolution that merely replaced one set of elites with another. They championed a second revolution, one that would sweep away not just Weimar democracy, but also the traditional conservative forces, the army, the aristocracy, the industrialists, who they believed still held too much sway. Röhm openly articulated these sentiments, particularly in internal SA publications and private meetings. He saw the SA, now estimated to be over 3 million strong by early 1934, as the true revolutionary force of Germany, not a mere political instrument. This radical rhetoric, however, alarmed those very conservative elements whose support Hitler needed to govern effectively and secure the loyalty of the professional military. General Werner von Blomberg, the Minister of War, began to express his profound unease to Hitler about the SA's growing power and their perceived threat to the Reichswehr's traditional role. Yet in the euphoric aftermath of their political victory, many, including some of Hitler's inner circle, dismissed Röhm's pronouncements as mere revolutionary bluster, an understandable excess from a passionate leader. They believed Röhm's loyalty to Hitler was unwavering, a bond forged in the earliest, hardest days of the party. No one truly imagined that this bluster was the sound of a ticking clock, counting down to something far more sinister. As 1934 progressed, the SA's behavior became increasingly intolerable, transforming from boisterous street fighters into an openly aggressive, almost autonomous force. Their numbers had swollen to an estimated 4.5 million, dwarfing the official Reichswehr by a factor of 45 to 1. Röhm, intoxicated by this power, openly demanded that the SA be integrated into the German army, forming the core of a new national military force with him at its head. This demand was not only a direct challenge to the Reichswehr's deeply cherished traditions and autonomy, but also a fundamental threat to Hitler's strategic alliance with the conservative establishment. Incidents of SA members extorting shopkeepers, engaging in street violence against political opponents, and even clashing with local police became alarmingly common across Germany. These actions threatened the very stability Hitler was promising to the world, and more importantly, to the influential industrialists and the traditional military who held the reins of state power. General Blomberg and other senior Reichswehr officers made it explicitly clear to Hitler the SA was a liability, a threat to order, and their insubordination had to be curtailed. The situation reached a boiling point in late May when a letter, reportedly from von Blomberg, was presented to Hitler, containing an ultimatum. Either Hitler curbed the SA's power, or the Reichswehr would take matters into its own hands, potentially leading to a civil war. The message was clear, direct, and non-negotiable, leaving Hitler with an impossible choice between his oldest allies and the military's crucial backing. This created an unbearable pressure, pushing the regime towards a desperate, violent resolution. With the Reichswehr's ultimatum hanging heavy, Hitler's other loyalists began to sense a shift in the wind, seeing an opportunity to eliminate their own rivals. Heinrich Himmler, the ambitious head of the SS, and his cunning deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, moved with calculated precision. The SS, initially a small bodyguard unit for Hitler, had grown into a formidable force under Himmler's command, driven by a cold, bureaucratic efficiency that contrasted sharply with the SA's street-level thuggery. Himmler and Heydrich saw Röhm and the SA as a direct impediment to their own rise, and a challenge to their vision of an orderly, disciplined Nazi state. Working in the shadows, they began fabricating a dossier, filled with forged documents and manufactured testimonies, portraying Röhm as not only planning a putsch against Hitler, but also receiving funds from a foreign power and engaging in a decadent homosexual lifestyle, which was condemned by Nazi ideology. Simultaneously, Hermann Göring, a prominent Nazi leader and commander of the burgeoning Luftwaffe, also harbored animosity towards Röhm, viewing him as a competitor for Hitler's favor and a threat to his own military ambitions. Goering readily joined the conspiracy, using his influence to gather intelligence and provide logistical support for the impending purge. The various factions within the Nazi leadership, united by their individual ambitions and common fear of Röhm's power, began to converge, creating an intricate web of deceit and manipulation. Yet even with all these forces arrayed against him, Röhm remained oblivious, believing his bond with Hitler was unbreakable. He saw himself as indispensable, failing to grasp that in the cutthroat world of Nazi politics, loyalty could be discarded as easily as a spent bullet casing, especially when it clashed with absolute power. Something, however, still didn't quite add up in the official narrative that was already being carefully constructed. Everything pointed towards a defensive maneuver, a desperate act by Hitler to protect himself and the traditional power structures from an imminent SA takeover. The official story, meticulously crafted and broadcast by Nazi propaganda, was that Ernst Röhm was planning a treacherous Röhm putsch, a violent coup against Hitler and the legitimate government. They claimed to have intercepted vital intelligence, confirming Röhm's intent to seize power on June 30, 1934, while many leaders were on vacation. Hitler, they asserted, had acted swiftly and decisively to preempt this grave threat to national security. He was presented as the savior of Germany, brutally but necessarily defending the nation from internal enemies. Yet the reality, when pieced together, revealed a stark contradiction. The purported intelligence was largely a fabrication by Himmler and Heydrich, lacking any credible detail of a specific date, time, or operational plan for a coup. There was no evidence of weapons caches being prepared, no troop movements, no strategic gatherings. Röhm himself was away on holiday, his guards unarmed, his closest allies scattered across Germany. The SA leaders, far from preparing a revolution, were largely on leave, enjoying the summer. The operation, codenamed Hummingbird, was not a reaction to an unfolding coup, but a pre-planned, highly coordinated offensive, initiated by Hitler himself. This was not a preemptive strike against a rebellion, it was a carefully orchestrated purge, designed to eliminate not just the SA leadership, but a host of other perceived political enemies, old scores settled under the convenient guise of a putsch. The meticulous planning, the suddenness of the assault, and the sheer scale of the killings hinted at a much deeper, more sinister agenda. This was not about defending the Reich, it was about consolidating absolute, unchallenged power, and the list of victims was far more extensive than merely disloyal stormtroopers. The Röhm putsch served as a convenient smokescreen, allowing Hitler to eliminate a far broader spectrum of opponents under the cover of a national emergency. Beyond the SA leadership, Hitler also sought to neutralize the conservative elements who had helped him into power, but now viewed him with growing apprehension. Foremost among these was Kurt von Schleicher, the former Chancellor of Germany, and his wife, Elizabeth. Schleicher represented the old military aristocracy and held dangerous knowledge of the political machinations that brought Hitler to power. He was gunned down in his home, his wife also murdered when she reportedly tried to intervene. Gustav von Kahr, a prominent Bavarian politician who had thwarted Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1923, was brutally murdered, his body found in a swamp, likely a long-awaited revenge. Gregor Strasser, a former leading figure in the Nazi Party and a rival to Hitler's socialist leanings, was also executed, seen as a threat to party unity and a potential focal point for dissent. Even some outspoken Catholic leaders and critics of the Nazi regime found themselves on the list. The purge was a chilling demonstration of Hitler's ruthless calculus. Anyone who posed a potential threat, anyone who held an independent power base, or anyone who simply knew too much was targeted. The killings were not limited to Bad Wiessee. Simultaneous arrests and executions occurred across Germany. It was a clear message to any who might consider opposing him. No one was safe, no past loyalty was sufficient, and absolute power would tolerate no rivals. The Night of Long Knives was not just about the SA. It was Hitler's final, bloody assertion of unquestioned dominance over every facet of German political life, eliminating not just future challenges, but also ghosts from the past. Amidst the wave of executions, the fate of Ernst Röhm stands as one of the most poignant examples of betrayal. Captured in Bad Wiessee, Röhm, just 46 years old, was transported to Stadelheim prison in Munich, a place he knew well from his earlier political activities. He was initially offered a chance to commit suicide, a soldier's death with a pistol placed in his cell. But Röhm, defiant to the end, refused. "If I am to be killed," he reportedly declared, "let Adolf do it himself." His refusal sealed his grim fate. On July 1, 1934, SS Sturmbannführer Michael Lippert and SS Obergruppenführer Theodor Eick, the commandant of Dachau concentration camp, entered his cell. Accounts differ slightly, but the outcome was unequivocal. Röhm was shot multiple times at close range. His death was immediate, brutal, and entirely premeditated. This was not the quick, decisive removal of a threat, but the cold-blooded murder of a former comrade, a man who had stood by Hitler through the beer hall putsch, through years of political struggle, and through the early, often violent days of the Nazi movement. Röhm had lost not only his life, but also his name and his legacy, transformed overnight by propaganda into a traitor and a degenerate. His execution served as a stark warning to anyone who might cling to the notion of independent loyalty or challenge the Führer's absolute authority. It was a deeply personal tragedy wrapped in a grand political purge, a vivid illustration that in Hitler's Germany, even the closest bonds of friendship and shared struggle could be severed with a bullet. The human cost extended far beyond Röhm. Families were torn apart, careers ruined, and the lives of countless individuals extinguished for reasons that often had little to do with any actual plot. The immediate aftermath of the Night of Long Knives was characterized by a concerted effort to control the narrative and suppress the truth. The official death toll, initially reported by Hitler as 61, was quickly revised upwards to 77, and then quietly acknowledged to be over 80. However, the true number is widely believed to be much higher, with estimates ranging from 150 to 200, possibly even more. The exact figures remain shrouded in secrecy, largely due to the systematic destruction of key documents. Specifically, the SS meticulously purged the internal records of the Gestapo and the SA regarding the arrests and executions conducted between June 30 and July 2, 1934, shortly after the event. Orders were given to destroy any sensitive material that could contradict the official Röhm putsch narrative or reveal the true extent of the killings. Many prison guards and local police officers who witnessed the arrests and the delivery of bodies were either reassigned, intimidated, or themselves disappeared, effectively silencing direct witnesses. For instance, reports from the Stadelheim prison commandant regarding Röhm's final moments and the subsequent disposal of his body were reportedly lost or misplaced within weeks. The lack of proper legal process, trials, or even public accusations for most victims meant no official records of their crimes existed, only the chilling fact of their disappearance. This deliberate erasure of evidence made it incredibly difficult for anyone, even years later, to accurately reconstruct the full scope of the atrocity. The regime's calculated silence and systematic destruction of incriminating evidence created a vacuum, allowing the official lie to solidify into accepted history for years. They understood that controlling information was as vital as controlling territory. Decades later, after the collapse of the Third Reich, the arduous task of piecing together the true events of the Night of Long Knives began. It fell to post-war investigators and historians, often working with fragmented evidence to unearth the hidden truths. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, key surviving Nazi figures, including Hermann Göring and Wilhelm Frick, were questioned about the purge. While they largely maintained the narrative of a preemptive strike against the Röhm putsch, their testimonies were riddled with inconsistencies and clear attempts to minimize their own involvement. One pivotal lead came from the meticulous records kept by Heinrich Himmler's SS. Despite attempts to destroy evidence, some administrative documents survived, particularly those related to the logistics of the SS units involved and lists of executed individuals, though these were never exhaustive. For instance, specific directives issued by Heydrich to regional SS and SD commanders, detailing the arrest and special treatment of designated individuals, were discovered in scattered archives. A crucial piece of evidence emerged from the personal diaries and letters of various high-ranking officials and victims' families. The personal diary of Joseph Goebbels, though fragmented, provided crucial insights into Hitler's state of mind leading up to the purge and the strategic calculations involved. These scraps of information, meticulously cross-referenced and analyzed by historians like Hans Mommsen and others during the 1950s and 60s, began to paint a far more coherent picture than the official Nazi propaganda. The investigators, sifting through mountains of testimony and remnants of official records, were able to connect the dots, slowly revealing the systematic, pre-planned nature of the purge, exposing it not as a defensive reaction, but as a calculated act of political consolidation. The sheer scale and targeting of individuals unrelated to the SA were particularly damning. Yet a specific document that clearly stated Hitler's explicit asterisk order for the mass murder, signed and dated, was never found. The official Nazi explanation, propagated immediately after the purge, was the Röhm putsch narrative. According to this version, Ernst Röhm and the SA were planning to overthrow Hitler's government, assassinate key leaders, and launch a second revolution. Hitler, they claimed, acted with swift, brutal efficiency to save Germany from civil war and preserve the National Socialist Revolution. Newspapers across the country echoed this line, praising the Führer for his decisive action against a traitorous cabal. However, this explanation utterly fails when confronted with the evidence gathered over subsequent decades. The most significant contradiction is the complete lack of any credible operational plan for a putsch. There were no orders for SA units to mobilize, no caches of weapons beyond their standard armaments, and no coordinated strategy for seizing government buildings or assassinating leaders. Röhm himself was on vacation, recovering from an illness, and his key lieutenants were scattered. If a coup was genuinely imminent, such a lack of preparation on the part of the supposed conspirators is not just improbable, but frankly absurd. Furthermore, the list of victims extended far beyond the SA leadership, including individuals like Kurt von Schleicher and Gustav von Kahr, who had no connection whatsoever to the SA or any alleged coup. Their murders were clearly politically motivated acts of revenge or preemptive elimination, demonstrating that the purge was not about defending against an SA takeover, but about settling scores and consolidating absolute power. The Röhm putsch was a desperate fabrication, a convenient justification for state-sponsored murder designed to legitimize an atrocity that had already taken place. The closest truth, now widely accepted by historians, is that the Night of Long Knives was a calculated, multifaceted political purge, driven by Hitler's ruthless ambition and a complex interplay of internal and external pressures. Renowned historian Ian Kershaw, in his seminal biography of Hitler, argues convincingly that the purge was not a reaction to an actual putsch, but a decisive act by Hitler to secure his own position and eliminate all potential rivals. The evidence points to three primary motivations. Firstly, the SA's growing power and revolutionary rhetoric genuinely threatened the Reichswehr, whose loyalty Hitler desperately needed to pursue his expansionist foreign policy aims. By sacrificing Röhm, Hitler secured the army's allegiance, a crucial step for future conquests. Secondly, the purge allowed Hitler to eliminate remaining conservative elements, such as Kurt von Schleicher and Gustav von Kahr, who represented the old guard and posed a potential institutional threat to his absolute rule. Thirdly, it was an opportunity to settle personal scores and eliminate internal party rivals like Gregor Strasser, who had once offered an alternative, more socialist vision for the Nazi Party. The timing was crucial. Hindenburg was aging and frail. Hitler needed to cement his control before the president's inevitable death, which would allow him to combine the offices of Chancellor and President. The events of June 30th to July 2nd, 1934, effectively removed all significant internal opposition, demonstrated Hitler's willingness to use extreme violence against his own people, and definitively shifted the balance of power within the Nazi regime, paving the way for the SS to rise to ultimate power. It was a masterclass in political brutality, transforming a charismatic leader into an absolute dictator, unencumbered by any internal challenge. The purge was a pivotal step, demonstrating the blueprint for the terror that was to come. But perhaps the single most disturbing fact about the Night of Long Knives is not just the act of murder itself, but its chilling legitimization. On July 3, 1934, a mere day after the last shots were fired and the bodies were still being disposed of, the Reich cabinet, under Hitler's direct influence, enacted a law known as the Law Regarding Measures of State Self-Defense. This retroactive decree formally declared all the killings committed during the purge, from June 30th to July 2nd, to be lawful as acts of state self-defense. It was a legal rubber stamp on mass murder, elevating political assassination to a legitimate tool of state policy. This wasn't merely a cover-up, it was the chilling precedent. It explicitly stated that the Führer's actions were above the law, creating a legal framework for future atrocities. By declaring that measures taken were legal, Hitler essentially placed himself beyond judicial accountability, making his will the highest law in the land. It removed any lingering pretense of rule of law in Germany, and formally established the principle that the leader's authority superseded all other legal or moral considerations. This moment marked a fundamental shift. The state was no longer bound by its own laws, but became an instrument of the Führer's absolute and arbitrary power. The Night of Long Knives, therefore, was not just a purge of individuals. It was the brutal severing of the last vestiges of legal order in Germany, paving the way for the systematic terror and genocide that would define the next decade. This was the moment where law became merely a tool for terror, wielded by a single, unchecked will. No one survived its implications unscathed. The Night of Long Knives stands as a terrifying testament to the ruthless mechanics of totalitarian power. It reveals how quickly an ally can become an enemy, how easily a leader can betray his most devoted followers, and how efficiently a state can dismantle its own legal and moral foundations to consolidate absolute control. This purge was Hitler's dress rehearsal, a blueprint for the systematic violence and terror that would define the Nazi regime. It demonstrated that no one was safe, that loyalty was conditional on utility, and that the Führer's will was the ultimate law. The casual brutality with which lives were extinguished, often for reasons known only to the executioners, sent a clear message. Dissent was death, and absolute obedience was the only path to survival. The silence that followed the purge, enforced by fear and propaganda, allowed Hitler to solidify his grip on Germany, turning it into a compliant instrument for his monstrous ambitions. The Night of Long Knives wasn't just a historical event, it was a psychological weapon, forever altering the landscape of German politics and setting a chilling precedent for the atrocities of the Holocaust and the horrors of World War II. It shows us that the line between ambition and absolute terror is perilously thin, and once crossed, impossible to uncross. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.